From Noah to the mentioning of his sons, we see a transition, and in this transition is a division of the world. All people come from Noah. We've talked about that a couple times, and from him we take one of three roots. We either come through Shem, who is the spiritual son. We've got a son of Shem right here. We come through Ham, who is the physical son, the one of physical achievement, or we come through Japheth, the intellectual son. That's where I come from. Most of us here come from Japheth. Unfortunately, I didn't get the intellect, but that's okay. We all come from one of those three lines. Now, I will turn to the writings of Ray Stedman, who I said I'd quote earlier in the sermon. I want to quote him now. I'm going to give you his reflective thoughts on how these three sons of Noah point to us as individuals and members of the human race, a race of people created in God's image and for his glory. Here are the writings of Ray Stedman. There are three divisions of mankind as there are three divisions in man, in you. To each of these divisions is given the responsibility for meeting one of the basic needs of man: spiritual, physical, and intellectual. In each of one of these, the same three divisions are found. We each have a capacity to worship. We each have a capacity to reason. And we each have a capacity to create. Now I'm going to stop here and I'm going to say that I don't like the word create. We don't create diddly. God creates, we produce. So one word in Ray Stedman's writings I'm going to amend, and I'm going to read the sentence again with my amendment. We each have a capacity to worship, we each have a capacity to reason, and we each have a capacity to produce. These are the things that distinguish us from the animals. This is the image of God in man. Each of them needs to be held in perfect balance. The world is in a state of confusion, uncertainty, and despair because the balance God intended has been left unfulfilled. So in your life, you are in a state of confusion, despair, frustration, weakness, or whatever it may be, because you have neglected to fulfill the threefold capacity of your own nature. You can only do so as they are kept in perfect harmony, one with the other. It is wrong to think of man as essentially spiritual. And we have people that go off into Buddhist monasteries, and we got Christians that go off into their monasteries, and we got people that I'm just Mr. Spiritual, and that's all they do. He says that's wrong. They are also intellectual and physical. It is wrong to think of him being essentially physical and to develop the athletic abilities to the neglect of others. In other words, we've got all these athletes with heads full of meat. They don't think things through, they work on their bodies, and when they get old, their life is over because they had nothing to cling to except their body, which is now worn out. He says man is also spiritual and intellectual. I'd like to bring up Arnold Schwarzenegger is a good example. He's this hulking guy, and he's also intellectual, but he neglected the spiritual. And you've seen what it's cost him in his own life. We have three differences in us: spiritual, physical, and intellectual, and all three have to be kept in balance or we get our lives into trouble. Going on, he says, if the order of Scripture obtains for the individual as well as for the race, the order within us is also Shem, Ham, and Japheth. First the spiritual, then the physical, then the intellectual. In that order, mankind finds its complete fulfillment. If we understand ourselves, we will also understand the world around us. The glory of the gospel is that it addresses itself to mankind exactly on those terms. We find ourselves entering into fulfillment, into excitement, into a dramatic sense of being what we were intended to be when we open our lives to God through Jesus Christ, making that our first priority. Then developing the physical life, taking care of the physical needs, physical demands, and through these working together to develop the intellect to an understanding of ourselves. Thank you, Ray Stedman. I can't think of a better analysis of chapter 10 of the Table of Nations. And now